part of the thing that we need to be able to do within our businesses is understand whether we should stick or twist. And Blockbuster and Kodak did some very strange things, but in essence, they decided to stick. Blockbuster didn't see the importance of the internet in terms of people loaning movies. It also decided it wasn't particularly impressed with a partnership offer that it had on the table from one of the new players in that particular space. That was Netflix. Kodak did two rather strange things. They're quite well known, I think, for inventing the digital camera and then tucking that away in a very safe place so that the digital camera didn't impact their film business. They also assumed that the American consumer would stick with good old American branded Kodak and not buy Fujifilm in the volumes they did. So by ignoring the signals, not necessarily the trends, but the signals that were emerging, there are lots of others as well, but these two companies caused themselves one or two problems. And what's interesting is these had a digital mindset. They understood that in order to be a successful enterprise in the future, you really needed to do something a little bit different. They understood the value of data, the value of information. And when they really started to grow, they weren't actually using very new high-tech systems. But what they did, really importantly, was they understood the value that people wanted when they wanted to hail a ride or when they wanted to rent a room. They then said, if that's the proposition, what are the technologies that allows me to deliver against that value as efficiently, as effectively as possible? And then they built their business model around that. Now, typically, if we're sat in any of these or successful companies right now, we kind of do it the other way around. We actually say, I've got my business model in mind. Here's a sexy piece of new kit because IT said, you've got to have some of this. It's really good. And then we kind of force fit it in order that we can continue to deliver our proposition to the consumers and customers that we've always done. But I think there's a really big risk in doing that because someone else will come into the space and actually take your customers away from you because they're better at firstly understanding what it is the customer and the consumer wants. And if you want some evidence about what investors think around digital companies, I think this is quite an eye-opener. So that's $1 trillion across the top, and the numbers have changed a little bit. And when we first put this slide together, it was when Apple first achieved a valuation of $1 trillion. One way or another, been up and down, but all of the big five have round about $1 trillion in terms of valuation. Each one of them individually is the same in valuation, in market capitalization, as all of these companies. So investors really like what digital businesses can deliver. It's really quite startling, isn't it? When you look at some of the size of those big ones. I think Boeing's probably dropped a little bit since then. So what does that say? Well, it says to me, actually, we need to adopt a new mindset. Because if we play by the rules of the game we've always played by, then it's going to be really hard for us to change. If we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. We need to be over here creating a new game, playing differently, really understanding our customers and consumers first, and then changing our business. It's really interesting, isn't it, how when lots of companies decide they want to kind of spin off some kind of innovative arm, they get a group of people together and say, you're really good at innovation, go and take some money, take a few people, go and work over there, we'll leave you alone, go and be innovative. And then those people, they go over there and they groove around because they're not saddled with the heritage from the organization. They do some really cool stuff. And they say, hey, look at us, we've done some really cool stuff. And the organization says, you're right, you have. Come back in here. And when they come back in there, they're completely swallowed by the old culture of the organization, and the innovation dies. Maybe the thing to do is to actually gradually switch resources the other way and let the old organization die. But actually, there's a whole bunch of other human emotions that are then tied into the legacy organization. And the real challenge then is, how do we change our DNA? How do we sit inside those legacy organizations and think, let's try and do something different? And that's really hard. And I think that's harder the bigger our organizations are. And I think this is why. In the past, we tended to be relatively certain about how the future might play out. I mean, things changed, yes, but they didn't change as rapidly. We didn't have so many new technologies close to market as we have now. There were all those other kind of drivers that weren't quite so prevalent as they are now. So we were quite close to certain about how the world was going to pan out. And we tended to agree with our colleagues and our stakeholders about how those things may play out. So this is where we were kind of down here in ordinary management. Ordinary management is good. We feel comfortable there. We feel quite safe there. But I think what we've seen so far this evening is that actually we're far away from certainty. We really don't know how some of these new technologies are going to play out. We don't know the nature of increasing urbanization and what that transition will be like from an analog to a digital world. And actually, we really can't agree on what we should be doing. And that's where we're up here in what I think of as extraordinary leadership. And it calls for quite a different mindset. If up here is going to be the new norm, then how do we encourage people to develop the skills that they've been displaying here in a world where actually everything we do feels like a wicked problem? So here are some things I think that at the enterprise and the individual level we need to think about. The first is this idea of extraordinary leadership. It's about understanding this stuff. It's about understanding how the world is changing. It's about understanding how people inside our organizations, inside our clients' organizations, might feel when presented with this stuff. It's about ensuring that we and the people around us are capable of moving from ordinary management to extraordinary leadership. It's really important, not that we understand how these new technologies work, but it is important that we equip ourselves with the knowledge to ask the right questions. And that's what I mean by digital literacy. What is the potential of those different elements of artificial intelligence? How might they start to impact new business models? What are my clients experiencing in the world? Because I think service industries are in really quite an interesting place. Because not only do you guys need to understand what this might do for your business, but you need to understand it from the perspective of your clients as well. And actually, I think encouraging them to understand this stuff is a real massive value that we can bring to clients. So digital literacy, really, really important. It really fascinates me how unready most education systems are. There's one study, and it's been questioned, but I'm going to use it anyway, that says, roughly speaking, 2/3 of the kids currently entering primary school will work in jobs that don't exist right now. So how on earth is the current education system going to help those kids come out of school, out of university, into a new workplace? And the same is true of the way that we train people as well. And there's always this debate between kind of the education system and companies about who's responsible for training and educating people. And maybe the balance has switched a little bit too much, that it's reliant on at the enterprise end in order to educate people. But I think there is a lot of significant change. If we think about the notion of automation and what automation might do to the workplace, then we really need to understand what it is that differentiates us from the automated systems and processes, and then make sure that we have those skills. So the softer skills maybe, and we'll look at those skills in a little bit more detail a bit later on. But it kind of changes the focus of education from a technical to a kind of a more social nature, problem solving and creativity and those kind of things. I find it really fascinating. I was speaking at an event with the Independent Association of Preparatory Schools a while ago. And the kids that they were focusing on there were preschool and early years. And the kind of things that they focus on in kids at that age is creativity, collaboration, empathy, exploration, all those kind of good stuff that you like to see kids doing. And then, of course, we get them into school and we say, no, forget all that. Just learn this maths, physics, geography, history stuff. And we kind of do that all the way through. And then when we get to work, the employers say, where's the creativity and the exploration? And yeah. So I think that it will be at the heart of the way that education changes. Interestingly, Finland's often held up as a really good example, and they do a number of things. One is they don't necessarily split kids off quite as readily as we do. They tend to start school a little bit later. It's a much more social experience. They're allowed to develop at their own rate, because after all, we're not all expected to pass a driving test by the time we're 24. And they have a free-to-access AI tutorial so that the whole of the population, actually, so anyone in the world, can learn a bit more about AI. So evaluating the exponentials, that's really about how do we encourage enterprise to really quickly make sense of some of these changes, of some of the technologies. How do we experiment really fast, learn fast, fail fast if we need to? And this is another one of those things that the bigger we are, the harder it is to do. It's really hard to be nimble. It's frowned upon to fail, and yet if you fail in the right way, then there are so many learnings. Clearly, you don't want to fail every time. But the idea that we need to really quickly evaluate these exponential opportunities, I think is really, really important. It's hard for government, it's hard for big business, it's much easier for smaller businesses. And we need to rethink work. That's really crystal clear. There are a lot of studies that talk about how work might change in the future. Some of them say between 50 and 80% of the jobs might go. Others say actually it's closer to 5 to 10%. However, 75% of 2/3 of the jobs will change very radically. So you can pays your money, you takes your choice, I suppose. But the learning there for me is that everyone agrees the world of work is going to change really significantly in the future. So we need to rethink that. From an employer's perspective, there's probably a lot that we're going to have to do in the future about transitioning people not only to new jobs inside the organization, but potentially to new jobs outside the organization. So there's a question there about employers' responsibility if we don't have jobs for the people we've already employed because we're automating processes and systems. And one of the things I think that increasingly companies will be expected to do is to support job creation in the way that potentially they contribute to local ecosystem enterprise funds or do some mentoring for local schools, colleges and universities. I think that we're likely to see quite a significant change in the role that enterprise is expected to play in this new emerging economy. And that's critical if you think about the number of new technologies that are likely to come to market. There's a big kind of caveat for me here, and that is, will the people that are going to work in those new technologies, in those new enterprises, be skilled enough to undertake the learning and development in order to do so? Because many people would argue that one of the things that happens with AI is that you end up with a load of jobs that require more highly qualified people. And that's great. There might be lots of jobs out there for highly qualified people, but not everyone necessarily has the necessary attributes in order to go through university. So there's still a risk here, I think, even in that kind of environment, in that kind of employment future, that we need to make sure that we bring everyone with us. And I've spoken a bit about this already, that actually what we're trying to do here as well is support these new sectors. It's really critically important that we do that if, as I believe, there will be significant change in the jobs market. I found it quite interesting that the UK's response to some of these opportunities, and I'm thinking here of Theresa May's Davos speech, where she correctly identified the need to be really good at how we think about AI, about establishing the UK as an AI centre of excellence, about underpinning that with investment in training, in education, in the STEM subjects and so on. However, that was predicated on the basis that actually the existing economic paradigm will exist. In other words, there'll be lots of economic growth all around the world that we can access. Now, it may come as a shock, but we're not the only country thinking of ourselves as an AI centre of excellence. And we're not quite investing the $420 billion that China is. So there's an interesting shift, I think, that needs to happen there in thinking to access that sector as well. One of the really interesting sectors, actually just going back to that the slide earlier on with all the different technologies, is the idea of synthetic biology. So how can we create artificial life forms? And this is one of the things that Stephen Hawking was concerned about, particularly if you then knit artificial life forms with artificial intelligence, because it's not beyond the realms of plausibility that artificial intelligence could create synthetic biology that we can't understand. And there's kind of an inherent danger in that. And that's some of the things that Professor Hawking was talking about. Both at the enterprise and I think at the global level, there needs to be some kind of sense that actually there's some ethics around the technologies that we're developing. When we're putting AI in place, why are we actually putting it in place? What are the protections that we have in place for humans, for the people not only that work for us, but humanity at large? And how then, and we touched on this earlier on, how do we adapt our leadership style, the way that we lead, what leadership means for an organization that's kind of hybrid in that it includes artificial intelligence, robotics, human 2.0, and the two normal people in the room. But it's actually really important that we do draw constructively on the past, because if we want to make sure that we keep humanity at the heart of what we do as an enterprise and as a society going forward, then we need to make sure that we build that around the good stuff that's in our past. Because actually, the technologies we're seeing do represent an incredible opportunity for us to change how we live. So if people aren't able to get the jobs they want, it should no longer be a stigma that they're out of work. There shouldn't be stigma around people choosing not to work. And that stigma should also not exist if they want to access universal basic income. But we do need the appropriate societal systems in place to ensure that people have the opportunity to live fulfilling lives. Because at the moment, most people have a degree of fulfillment through their work. So if that doesn't exist at some point in the future, then it needs to be replaced. So this kind of coming together of the future opportunity represented by new technologies and drawing constructively on the past, I think is really critically important. And the thing that I always say at events like this is, human dialogue is really important. If I've been able to share a perspective on things that helps you think slightly differently about the way the future might evolve, allows you to have some conversations with other people about some of these topics and some of these areas of development, then that's great, because actually we all have a we all have a role to play in making sure that as a society we make the right kind of choices that we have in an increasingly digitized world.